What if the one person who could save you was the one person you were most terrified of? What if a single, impossible word from the mouth of a child could rewrite your entire future? We live our lives in quiet patterns, in cycles of work and sleep, hope and disappointment, believing our station is fixed. We tell ourselves that fairy tales are for books, that miracles don't happen in the break rooms of high-end restaurants where the smell of bleach clings to your worn-out shoes. But what if they do? This is the story of Ilara, a woman who had become so good at being invisible that she had almost forgotten she was there. And it is the story of Alastair Sterling, a man so powerful he lived on an island of his own making, surrounded by a sea of glass and steel. It is the story of a single moment, a single word, that brought their two worlds crashing together. Ilara's life was a delicate tapestry of carefully managed emergencies. Her worn-out sedan had a slow leak in the front left tire. Her mother's medical bills were a teetering mountain of paper on her small kitchen table. Her heart was a locked room, the key long lost after a grief so profound it had reshaped her. She moved through the opulent dining room of Aurelia, the city's most exclusive restaurant, with a practiced invisibility. A ghost in a black apron, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, her face a polite, neutral mask. Her colleagues saw her as quiet, perhaps a little sad, but reliable. The wealthy patrons didn't see her at all. She was just part of the seamless, expensive service they paid for. Her real life, her whole world, was a 5-year-old girl named Lily, whose laughter was the only color in Ilara's monochrome existence. But on this Tuesday, the fragile balance of her life shattered. The babysitter had cancelled, a sudden fever, and Ilara had no one else. The choice was stark: miss a crucial shift and risk being fired, or break every rule and bring her daughter to work. So Lily was here, tucked away in the cramped, windowless staff closet that served as a break room, armed with a coloring book and a juice box, under strict instructions to be as quiet as a mouse. Ilara's anxiety was a physical thing, a knot tightening in her stomach with every passing minute. In the restaurant's most secluded private dining room, the summit, a different kind of pressure was building. Alastair Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Global, sat at the head of a long mahogany table. His nickname in the financial press was the Ice King, a title earned through a series of ruthless acquisitions and an almost inhuman detachment. His suit was a whisper of dark, tailored perfection. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed nothing. He was dining with 2 board members and a potential investor, and the air was thick with unspoken tension. One of those board members was Marcus Thorne, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, who saw Alastair not as a leader but as a rival to be unseated. Alastair ignored the cloying politics. He was focused on legacy, on the cold, hard numbers that defined his world. He felt the familiar weight of his loneliness settle over him, a cloak as finely tailored as his suit. He was surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. In the staff closet, the juice box was empty and the coloring book was finished. Lily, a child of boundless energy and curiosity, was bored. The promise of being a quiet mouse had worn thin. She pushed open the heavy door just a crack, her small face peeking out into the hushed, carpeted hallway. She could hear the murmur of voices, the clink of silverware. Drawn by the sound, she tiptoed down the corridor, a tiny explorer in a vast, unknown land. The door to the summit room was slightly ajar. Through the gap, she saw the men in dark suits. Her eye settled on the one at the head of the table. He had his back to her, but there was something about the set of his shoulders, the shape of his head, that felt familiar. He shifted in his chair, turning slightly to address the man beside him. His profile came into view. Lily's breath hitched. Her heart, a tiny, frantic drum, beat against her ribs. It was him. It was the man from the photograph. The man her mommy cried about sometimes when she thought Lily was asleep. With the unthinking certainty of a child, she pushed the heavy door open. The room fell silent. Every head turned. Marcus Thorne's face curdled into a sneer of disbelief. Alastair Sterling looked up from his papers, his expression one of cold annoyance at the interruption. And then he saw her. A small girl with wide, tear-filled eyes and a cloud of dark hair, standing in the doorway. Before anyone could react, she ran. She didn't run to the side, she didn't hesitate. She ran straight towards the head of the table, her little legs pumping. She crashed into Alistair's leg, wrapping her arms around his knee as tightly as she could. She looked up, her face streaked with sudden tears, and from her mouth came the word that shattered the universe. Daddy! The single word hung in the air, electric and impossible. The clinking of forks stopped. The quiet murmur of conversation died. The city outside, with its endless traffic and noise, seemed to fall completely silent. For a frozen second, the only sound was Lily's small sob. Alistair Sterling stared down at the child clinging to his leg. His face, usually a mask of impenetrable calm, was utterly blank. His mind, a machine of ruthless logic and calculation, had ceased to function. Daddy? The word was alien, a foreign language he had never heard spoken to him. Then, chaos. Ilara, realizing Lily was gone, had followed the sound of the opening door. She appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of pure horror. Lily! Oh my God, I am so sorry, she gasped, rushing forward. Her hands trembled as she tried to gently pry her daughter away from the billionaire's leg. Lily, no, let go. I'm so sorry, sir. She got out. I am so sorry. Lily only clung tighter, burying her face against the expensive fabric of Alistair's trousers. It's Daddy, she mumbled, her voice thick with tears. It's him. Marcus Thorne leaned back in his chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. This was perfect. A delicious, public humiliation for the untouchable Alistair Sterling. Well, Alistair, Marcus drawled, his voice dripping with false concern. It seems you have a secret you've been keeping from the board. Alistair didn't even look at him. His gaze was fixed on Ilara. He saw the raw panic in her eyes, the flush of shame on her cheeks, the frantic way she tried to control the situation. He saw her worn uniform, the slight fraying at the cuff. And then his eyes dropped back to the child. Something in her desperate, hopeful face pierced the armor he had worn for a decade. He felt a flicker of an emotion so ancient and buried he couldn't name it. He raised a hand, not to push the child away, but to signal for calm. It's all right, he said, his voice rough, unused to such words. He looked at Ilara. Take her. Ilara finally managed to detach Lily, scooping her into her arms. I'm so sorry, she whispered again, backing out of the room, her heart pounding with the certainty that her life as she knew it was over. She had just caused a scene in front of the most powerful man in the city. She would be fired. She would be blacklisted. The mountain of debt would finally collapse and bury her. As she fled down the hall, Alistair stood up, his composure returning like a shroud. Gentlemen, he said, his voice once again crisp and cold. Forgive the interruption. Let's resume. But he wasn't looking at the contract on the table. He was looking at the empty doorway, his mind replaying that one impossible word. Daddy! The walk to the manager's office felt like a march to the gallows. Ilara carried a still sniffling Lily, her own tears threatening to fall. She had been summoned a few minutes after returning to the break room, the call coming with a grim finality. This was it. She rehearsed her apologies, her pleas, knowing they were useless. She pushed open the door to Mr. Dubois's office and stopped dead. The portly, perpetually stressed manager was there, wringing his hands, but he wasn't the one who commanded the room. Seated behind the desk, as if he owned it, which, Ilara supposed, he technically did, was Alistair Sterling. He looked up as she entered, his gaze intense, unreadable. Close the door, he said. It wasn't a request. Ilara did as she was told, her hand shaking. She set Lily down, who immediately hid behind her mother's legs. Sir, I can't tell you how sorry I am, Ilara began, her voice trembling. There is no excuse. I was desperate, my babysitter cancelled, and I will accept the consequences. Please don't hold this against the restaurant. Alistair held up a hand, silencing her. He wasn't looking at her with anger. It was something else. A piercing, analytical curiosity. During dinner, he began, his voice low and even, I overheard you speaking to one of the kitchen staff. He dropped a tray of dishes. You calmed him down. In Mandarin, Elara blinked, confused. He was new. He was scared, and later, Alastair continued, leaning forward slightly, you gave directions to a German couple in the lobby who were lost. Your accent was flawless. Native levels. My mother was a linguistics professor, Elara said quietly. I grew up with languages. Alastair was silent for a moment, his fingers steepled. I have a deal in Zurich next week. The negotiations are with a trilingual consortium. German, Mandarin, English. My current translation team is adequate, but they lack nuance. They translate words, not intent. He paused, his gaze unwavering. I'm offering you a job. Personal consultant and translator for the duration of these negotiations. The salary will be $100,000. Elara's mind went blank. She thought she must have misheard. $100,000? That was more than she made in 2 years. It would wipe out her mother's medical debt completely. It was a life raft in the middle of an ocean. But why? She stammered. Because of what happened in the dining room? Sir, I assure you, my daughter, her father passed away before she was born. She saw your picture in a magazine once, and there's a resemblance. It was a mistake. I'm aware it was a mistake, Alastair said, his voice flat. But a strange, calculating light had entered his eyes. However, the situation has presented a unique opportunity. There are certain pressures on me. Public perceptions. My board, my competitors, they see me as a machine. This incident, as disruptive as it was, has inadvertently created a narrative. A humanizing 1 inch. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the glittering city lights. I want you to take the job. And for the duration of our association, I want you to allow that narrative to persist. I don't want you to confirm it, but I don't want you to deny it either. Let them speculate. It serves a purpose I can't explain to you right now. Elara was reeling. He wanted to hire her for her skills, but also to use her and her daughter as a shield, a piece of public relations strategy. It felt wrong, exploitative. But then she thought of the bills on her table. She thought of the leak in her tire, a small problem that represented 1,000 other, larger ones. She looked down at Lily, who was peeking out from behind her legs, staring at Alastair with wide, curious eyes. This wasn't just a life raft. This was a rescue ship. She started, her throat dry. I'll do it. Alastair nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Good. My lawyer, Julian Vance, will be in touch tomorrow with a contract. You'll start immediately. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. He looked down at Lily, and for a fraction of a second, the ice in his eyes seemed to thaw. She has her father's eyes, he said, so quietly Elara almost didn't hear it. Then he was gone, leaving Elara standing in the center of the room, the world spinning around her. The transition was dizzying, a violent lurch from one reality to another. One day, Elara was scrubbing grease from her uniform. The next, she was standing in a glass-walled office on the 80th floor of the Sterling Global Tower, the city sprawling beneath her like a circuit board. The worn-out sedan was replaced by a sleek black town car that picked her up each morning. Her frayed apron was replaced by a collection of sharp, elegant business attire, selected for her by a personal shopper and paid for by the company. It felt like a costume, and she felt like an imposter playing a role she hadn't auditioned for. Lily was enrolled in the building's exclusive daycare, a wonderland of bright colors and educational toys that cost more per week than Elara used to earn in a month. She was a child transformed, blossoming in the new environment. The world of Sterling Global was cold and intimidating. Hallways were silent, conversations were hushed. People moved with a sense of urgent purpose, their faces impassive. Elara was an anomaly, a sudden disruption to their ordered universe. Whispers followed her down the polished corridors. She was the waitress mistress, the CEO's secret baby mama. The stairs were a mixture of curiosity, envy, and contempt. Leading the charge of contempt was Marcus Thorne. He made no secret of his disdain, his eyes lingering on her with open scorn whenever they passed in the hall. He saw her as a vulgar opportunist, a weakness in Alastair that he could exploit. Enjoying the view, he asked her one afternoon, coming to stand beside her as she looked out her office window. "It's a long way down." The threat was veiled but unmistakable. Her only anchor in this strange new world was Julian Vance, Alastair's longtime lawyer and confidant. He was a man in his 50s, with kind, weary eyes that had seen everything. He greeted Ilara not with suspicion, but with a cautious professionalism. "Alastair doesn't do things without a reason," Julian told her during their first meeting to sign the contract. "But this is unorthodox, even for him. Just be careful, Ms. Rossi. This world eats people like you for breakfast." Despite the warnings and the whispers, Ilara focused on the work. Alastair submerged her in the complexities of the Zurich deal. She spent 16 hours a day poring over documents, market analyses, and correspondence in 3 different languages. Her mind, so long underutilized, came alive. She wasn't just translating, she was analyzing, finding connections, seeing patterns that the others missed. Late one evening, she was reviewing the preliminary term sheet from the Swiss consortium. Alastair was in his office next door, a silhouette against the city lights. Everyone else had gone home. Ilara frowned, rereading a clause in the German section. The official translation was straightforward, a standard liability clause. But the phrasing, it was subtly archaic, almost poetic. It was a specific regional dialect from the canton of Graubünden. It wasn't a standard legal term. It was a phrase used in old folk tales, meaning something akin to a debt of honor that can never be repaid. It was completely out of place in a modern contract. She walked into Alastair's office, her heart pounding. "Sir," she said, placing the document on his desk. "Clause 14b. The translation says it's about liability, but it's not. The phrasing they've used, it's a cultural idiom. It implies a perpetual, binding obligation, not a financial one. They're trying to lock you into a partnership that goes far beyond this single deal." Alastair read the clause, then looked at her, his eyes narrowed. He picked up his phone and called his legal team in Zurich. A short, clipped conversation in German followed. He hung up, his expression grim. "My team missed it completely," he said, his voice low. "They read the words, not the meaning. You just saved this company from a mistake that would have cost us not millions, but potentially billions in future entanglements." He stared at her, and for the first time, the distance between them seemed to shrink. He wasn't looking at a waitress, or a public relations strategy. He was looking at a colleague, an asset. "Thank you, Ilara," he said. The use of her first name was more significant than any bonus. In that moment, Ilara felt a flicker of something new, not fear, but belonging. She wasn't just an imposter anymore. She had earned her place. The atmosphere in the office began to shift, subtly at first, then more noticeably. The whispers didn't stop, but they were now tinged with a grudging respect. People had seen her walk into the Ice King's office and emerge having changed his mind. They saw the long hours she put in, the stacks of documents on her desk. She was no longer just the waitress, she was the linguist, the woman with the CEO's ear. Alastair, for his part, remained an enigma, but the wall of ice around him had begun to show cracks. He started asking about Lily, his questions brief and formal, but consistent. Did she enjoy the daycare today? Has she made any friends? He would sometimes watch from his office window as Ilara collected Lily from the daycare in the lobby, a strange, wistful expression on his face. The Zurich deal was a week away, and their workdays grew longer, bleeding into nights. They developed a rhythm, a shorthand. She learned to anticipate his needs, and he learned to trust her instincts. One night, fueled by coffee and the shared pressure of the impending deal, Ilara found the courage to ask. "Why me?" she said, her voice quiet in the vast, silent office. "It wasn't just the languages, was it? There are hundreds of qualified translators in this city." Alastair was quiet for a long time, staring out at the river of light that was the city's main thoroughfare. "No," he finally said. It wasn't just the languages. He walked over to a locked credenza and opened it, pulling out a small, leather-bound photo album. He opened it to a page with a single, faded photograph. It showed two young men, almost identical, with their arms around each other, grinning at the camera. One was clearly a younger Alastair, his hair less tamed, a hint of a smile on his lips. The other was his mirror image, but his smile was wider, his eyes brighter, a chaotic energy radiating from him. "My twin brother, Daniel," Alastair said, his voice losing its sharp, corporate edge, softening with a grief that was still raw. He was the artist, the free spirit. I was the pragmatist, the heir. He hated this world. He walked away from it all 10 years ago. We had a fight, a terrible one. I said things I can never take back. He told me he was going to disappear, to live a real life, free from the sterling name. He traced the outline of his brother's face with his finger. He died 6 years ago. A climbing accident in South America. He was using an assumed name. It took months for them to identify him and notify me. Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. The story was tragic, but there was more. Alastair turned the page. There was another photo, this one of Daniel with a young woman Ilara didn't recognize. We were never close after he left, Alastair continued, but he sent me this photo a year before he died. He said he had met someone. He didn't tell me her name. He said he was happy. He then looked straight at Ilara, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical force. When your daughter ran up to me for a second, I thought I was seeing a ghost. And when you told me her father had died, that you only had one picture of him. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Ilara's mind was racing. Her husband, Liam, the man she had met and fallen in love with during a whirlwind romance while she was studying abroad. He had been charming, brilliant, and fiercely private about his past, claiming he was an orphan with no family to speak of. He had died in a car crash just before she found out she was pregnant. All she had left of him was one blurry, sun-drenched photograph. A photograph of a man with a wide, chaotic smile and bright eyes. A man who looked exactly like the one in Alastair's album. The pieces were slotting into place with a terrifying, earth-shattering click. Liam wasn't his real name. He was Daniel Sterling. Her late husband was Alastair's estranged twin brother. And Lily? Lily was not just her daughter. She was Alastair Sterling's niece. The last living piece of the brother he had lost. The revelation hung between them, a silent, monumental truth that recontextualized everything. His bizarre job offer. His obsession with Lily. His quiet, pained glances. It wasn't a PR strategy. It was a desperate, clumsy attempt to connect with the only part of his lost brother he had left. The weight of this new reality was immense. Ilara looked at Alastair, truly seeing him for the first time. The Ice King persona was a fortress built around a core of profound loss and regret. And she, unwittingly, had brought him a ghost. The days leading up to the Zurich trip were a blur of intense preparation, now overlaid with this staggering personal connection. The dynamic between them had changed. The professional boundary was still there, but it was now transparent, revealing the shared grief and the unspoken bond that was Lily. Neither of them spoke of it again, but the knowledge was a constant presence, a low hum beneath every conversation. Marcus Thorne watched this new, subtle intimacy with growing alarm and jealousy. He saw the way Alastair now deferred to Ilara's judgment, the way her presence seemed to soften his harshest edges. To Marcus, Ilara was no longer just a scandalous curiosity, she was a genuine threat to his own ambitions. He believed Alastair's judgment was compromised, clouded by this bizarre personal entanglement. He saw his chance to finally unseat his rival, and he took it. 2 days before they were scheduled to fly to Zurich, the story broke. It was on the front page of the city's most vicious tabloid, a splash of lurid headlines and grainy telephoto pictures of Ilara and Lily entering the Sterling Tower. ICE King's secret heir, screamed one headline. CEO's waitress mistress and love child move in. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation and malicious fiction. It painted Ilara as a conniving gold digger who had trapped the billionaire with a child of questionable paternity. It quoted anonymous insiders, clearly Marcus, who expressed deep concern over their CEO's erratic behavior and compromised judgment. The scandal exploded. It was the lead story on every financial news network. The sterling global stock ticker dipped. The board of directors was in an uproar, their phones ringing off the hook. An emergency board meeting was called. The air in the boardroom was thick with panic and recrimination. Marcus Thorne sat at the table, the picture of feigned concern. "Alastair, this is a disaster," one of the older board members said, his face pale. "This Zurich deal is the most sensitive negotiation we've faced in a decade. We need our partners to see strength and stability, not a tabloid circus. This woman, she has to go. You have to issue a statement, sever all ties." Immediately Julian Vance, standing behind Alastair, gave a slight, grim nod. It was the logical move, the only way to contain the damage. Fire Ilara, kill the story, save the deal. Alastair listened to it all, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He let them vent, let the panic fill the room. Ilara, who had been summoned to wait outside the boardroom, felt her world collapsing for the second time. She could hear the raised voices through the thick oak doors. This was her fault. Her presence was destroying the man who had, for whatever complicated reasons, saved her. The door opened and Julian stepped out, his face grave. "His refusing," Julian said, his voice low. "They're demanding he fire you." "He won't do it, he has to," Ilara whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Tell him to do it, Julian." "He can't risk his company for me, it's not about the company anymore," Julian said, looking at her with a newfound understanding. "It's about his brother. It's about that little girl. He's not going to sacrifice the only piece of his family he has left." The boardroom door swung open again. Alastair stood there, his tie slightly loosened, his eyes blazing with a fire Ilara had never seen. He ignored the stunned faces of the board members. He looked directly at Ilara. "Pack your bags," he said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "We're going to Zurich." The flight to Zurich was a bubble of tense silence suspended 30,000 feet above the world. Lily slept peacefully in a first-class seat that converted into a bed, oblivious to the storm raging around her. Ilara sat across the aisle from Alastair, the unspoken truths and the public lies creating a chasm between them. The Zurich deal was no longer just a business transaction, it had become a trial. For Alastair, it was a battle for his corporate life. For Ilara, it was the ultimate test of her worth, her one chance to prove to the world, and to herself, that she was more than the caricature the tabloids had created. "They think you are my weakness," Alastair said, breaking the long silence. He was staring out the window at the endless expanse of clouds. "Marcus, the board, they think my judgment is compromised because of you." He turned to look at her, his gaze locking with hers. "They are wrong. You are not my weakness. You are my advantage. Your mind, your ability to see what others miss, that is our only chance of winning this." The word settled over Ilara, a weight of responsibility and a surge of empowerment. He wasn't protecting her, he was depending on her. Upon landing, they were met with a frosty reception. The Swiss consortium, led by a stern, old-money patriarch named Klaus Richter, was clearly aware of the scandal. Their greetings were clipped, their smiles thin. The press had followed them, a pack of photographers waiting outside their hotel. Alastair shielded Ilara and Lily from the flashing cameras, his armor protective barrier, an act that only fueled the media frenzy. The first day of negotiations was brutal. Richter and his team were relentless, picking apart every clause, questioning every projection. The atmosphere was adversarial, hostile. The translators provided by the consortium were technically proficient but cold, turning the negotiation into a sterile, transactional affair. Alastair was holding his own, but they were making no progress. Marcus Thorne was receiving hourly updates from a contact on the Swiss team, gloating to the other Sterling board members via email about Alastair's impending failure. That evening, back in their hotel suite, the mood was grim. Alastair paced the floor while Ilara reviewed her notes. "They're not budging," Alastair said, frustration edging his voice. "It's not about the money. We've met every financial demand. There's something else, a sticking point I can't identify. Ilara looked up from her notes. It's Klaus Richter, she said. I've been watching him. He's the one holding this up. And you're right, it's not about the money. Listen to the language he uses. When he talks about his company, he uses words like a legacy, heritage, birthright. He doesn't call it a corporation, he calls it a house. He's not a modern CEO, he's a patriarch protecting his dynasty. She stood up, her own confidence growing. He sees you as a corporate raider, an American cowboy with no respect for tradition. The scandal just confirms his bias. He thinks you're reckless and dishonorable. You've been trying to win a business deal, but he's trying to secure his family's future. You're speaking different languages, and I don't mean German or English. Alastair stopped pacing. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the sharp, analytical mind that had been hidden beneath a waitress's apron. She hadn't just translated the words, she had decoded the entire conflict. A slow smile touched Alastair's lips, the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him. So how do we win? He asked. You stop trying to talk to the CEO, Ilara said, her voice firm. And you start talking to the father. The second day of negotiations began with a marked shift in strategy. Alastair, following Ilara's counsel, set aside the financial projections and spreadsheets. He began by addressing Klaus Richter not as a business adversary, but as a peer. With Ilara translating, her voice conveying not just the words but the precise emotional tone he intended, Alastair spoke about his own family. He spoke of his father, the founder of Sterling Global, and the weight of carrying on a legacy. He spoke of the responsibility not just to shareholders, but to the families of the thousands of people his company employed. He didn't mention Daniel by name, but he spoke of loss, of the painful lessons that come with it, and of the importance of building something that lasts beyond a single lifetime. Klaus Richter listened, his stern expression unchaining. For the first time, he was hearing a man, not a corporate machine. The tension in the room began to dissipate. They were making progress. During a short recess, Ilara stepped into the hallway to get some water. She was suddenly cornered by Marcus Thorne, who had, to everyone's surprise, flown in from New York. "This is your fault," he hissed, his face contorted with rage. "You think you're clever, don't you? Manipulating him, filling his head with this sentimental nonsense. When this deal collapses, and it will, the board will hold you personally responsible. You'll be ruined. And he'll be finished. He trusts me," Ilara said, her voice steady, refusing to be intimidated. "And you can't stand that. This isn't about the company's well-being, Marcus. This is about your ego. You're nothing but a waitress who got lucky," he spat, his voice rising. "You're a parasite unseen by either of them." The door to the conference room had opened slightly. Klaus Richter stood there, along with his own translator. He had come out to ask a question but had stopped, listening to the heated exchange. Ilara stood her ground, her chin held high. "Maybe I am just a waitress," she said, her voice ringing with a quiet, powerful dignity. "But I know the difference between value and price. I know what integrity is. It's something you can't buy, and it's something you clearly don't have." Marcus was about to retort when he saw Klaus Richter over Ilara's shoulder. The color drained from his face. Richter looked from the flustered Marcus to the composed Ilara. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of respect toward her, then turned and went back into the conference room without a word. The final phase of the negotiation was a formality. The deal was signed. It was a victory, complete and undeniable. Back in New York, the news sent Sterling Global stock soaring. The board members who had called for Alastair's head were now singing his praises. That evening, in the celebratory haze, Alastair didn't take Ilara and Lily to a fancy restaurant. Instead, the town car drove them out of the city, deep into the rolling hills of the countryside, to a sprawling, old stone estate. The Sterling family home. He led them into a grand, wood-paneled library. Over the massive stone fireplace hung a large, oil-on-canvas portrait. It was the man from the photograph, Alastair's twin. But this was no blurry snapshot. This was Daniel Sterling, captured in stunning detail, his eyes full of life and rebellious energy. Lily, holding Ilara's hand, looked up at the painting. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "It's Daddy." Ilara knelt, her own eyes filled with tears as she looked from the portrait to her daughter. "Yes, sweetie," she whispered. "It's your daddy." Alastair stood beside them, placing a gentle hand on Ilara's shoulder. The mystery was solved. The truth, in all its painful, beautiful complexity, was finally out in the open. He was not Lily's father. He was her uncle. And in that quiet library, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, a new family was beginning to form. The revelation settled into their lives, rearranging every piece. The truth about Daniel, or Liam, as Ilara had known him, was a bittersweet cocktail of grief for the man she had loved and a strange, comforting sense of closure. He hadn't been an orphan, he had a family, a history, a brother who was now standing right beside her. For Alastair, the confirmation that Lily was his niece was a profound, life-altering gift. The guilt he carried over his last fight with Daniel began to transform into a sense of purpose. He couldn't save his brother, but he could honor his memory by loving and protecting his child. The corporate world, however, still had its reckoning. The success of the Zurich deal was a stunning victory for Alastair, solidifying his position as CEO. But the matter of Marcus Thorne and the tabloid leak remained. Julian Vance had conducted a quiet but thorough investigation. Digital footprints were found. Anonymous emails were traced. Marcus's betrayal was not a matter of speculation, it was a matter of fact, documented and undeniable. Alastair summoned Marcus to his office. It was not a conversation, it was a verdict. "Your actions were not born from concern for this company," Alastair said, his voice as cold and sharp as surgical steel. "They were born from envy and ambition. You used a woman and a child as weapons in a corporate power play. You gambled with the reputation of this company to satisfy your own ego. That is a failure of character, not just of judgment." Marcus, stripped of his usual arrogance, could only stammer denials that sounded hollow even to himself. He was fired, his dismissal immediate and absolute, a stark warning to anyone else on the board who valued ambition over integrity. With the internal threat neutralized, Alastair turned his attention to the external one. He didn't issue a dry corporate press release. Instead, he did something unprecedented. He sat for a single, exclusive interview with a respected journalist, with Ilara by his side. He told the truth, or at least, a carefully curated version of it. He spoke of his late brother, his estrangement, and his recent discovery of the niece he never knew he had. He introduced Ilara not as a mistress or an employee, but as his brother's beloved partner and the mother of his niece. He framed the story not as a scandal, but as a deeply personal family matter that had played out under a harsh public spotlight. He praised Ilara's extraordinary intellect and integrity, announcing her new, permanent role at Sterling Global, Vice President of International Relations. The narrative was flipped. The story was no longer about a sordid affair, but about family, loss, and redemption. The public, always a sucker for a fairy tale, embraced it. Ilara was no longer a gold digger, she was a grieving widow, a brilliant underdog, a modern-day princess. The Ice King had a heart after all. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, the real work began, the work of building a life together. Alastair, Ilara, and Lily started spending weekends at the country estate. The cavernous house, once a monument to Alastair's loneliness, began to fill with the sound of Lily's laughter. Alastair taught her how to ride a pony. Ilara discovered Daniel's old art studio, untouched for years, and found sketchbooks filled with drawings of her, capturing moments she thought only she remembered. Their professional partnership, forged in the crucible of the Zurich deal, had been built on respect and trust. Now, in the quiet moments between board meetings and bedtime stories, something deeper was growing. It was a slow, tentative bloom. They would talk for hours, sharing stories of the brother and the husband they had both known in such different ways. He saw in her a strength and resilience that humbled him. She saw in him a vulnerability and a capacity for love that he kept hidden from the world. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky, the space between them no longer felt like a chasm. When I first saw you in that restaurant, Alastair said, his voice quiet, I saw a problem to be managed. Then I saw an asset to be utilized. Then, in Zurich, I saw a partner. He turned to her, his winter sky eyes now holding a warmth she had never seen before. But now, when I look at you, Ilara, I see my future. I see a home. The romance that had been a subtle undercurrent throughout their tumultuous journey finally broke the surface. It wasn't a whirlwind passion, but a deep, steady connection born from shared loss, mutual respect, and the unexpected, miraculous gift of a little girl who had seen a father where the world saw only a king. He didn't offer her a contract this time. He took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. He offered her a partnership in every sense of the word, a promise to build a new legacy together, one defined not by stock prices and acquisitions, but by love, family, and second chances. Months later, the transformation is complete. The city skyline still glitters outside the 80th floor window, but the view is different now. It is no longer a cold, distant map of power, but a backdrop to a life filled with warmth and connection. Ilara is no longer the invisible woman. She moves through the halls of Sterling Global with a quiet confidence that turns heads. She heads a new, thriving division, her innate understanding of culture and communication becoming one of the company's greatest assets. She is respected, admired, and brilliant in her own right, her success earned not through her connection to Alastair, but through her own formidable talent. Alastair is no longer the Ice King. The change is visible in the way he smiles more easily, in the way he listens more than he commands. He still possesses the sharp intellect and ruthless drive that built his empire, but it is now tempered with a humanity that makes him a better leader, a better man. He leaves the office at 5 o'clock now, a practice that initially sent shockwaves through the company. His most important meetings now happen at home, around a dinner table, discussing Lily's day at school. And Lily, the catalyst for it all, is the sun around which their new universe revolves. She has a doting uncle who is slowly, awkwardly, learning to be a father figure. She has her mother, happy and secure. She has the memory of a father she never met, but whose legacy lives on in the family he inadvertently created. They are a family, forged not by convention, but by a series of impossible events. A family born from a child's mistake, a brother's secret, and a powerful man's hidden grief. So I ask you again, what defines a family? Is it the blood that runs through our veins, or the bonds we choose to forge in the face of adversity? What defines a person's worth? Is it the station they are born into, the uniform they wear, or the hidden, brilliant gifts they carry inside them, waiting for someone to finally see? Ilara's story is a reminder that you are not defined by your circumstances. Your past does not have to be your future. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are not loud, earth-shattering events, but quiet, profound shifts of the heart. Sometimes, the person who seems the most intimidating, the most untouchable, is the one who needs connection the most. And sometimes, a single word from a child can be powerful enough to build a whole new world. Share this story if you believe in second chances, in the power of love to heal old wounds, and in the extraordinary potential that lies hidden within ordinary people. Let us know in the comments, have you ever had a moment that changed your life forever? We want to hear your story, because every story of hope deserves to be told.